Yeah. Hi, this is the very first episode of Hands Up podcast. There's not much of serious thought behind this name. I was just listening to a song called Hands Up in Kannada, and I thought, like, okay, if someone is coming on this, they should be really vulnerable and speak up without any inhibitions. Like there's also an element of threat that I'm actually putting them on a stand and saying hands up. Before bantering, like I'll just introduce myself. I'm Nitish. I work as a product manager, but I'm having a lot of these random interests, among which books and literature happens to be one of my big I don't know, hobbies or passions. You can call it anything you want. And for the first episode, we have Angana, who is a prof at Jindal University, and she teaches literature. But Angana, I'll ask you to introduce yourself because I think you can do that better than me.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me as a guest for your very first episode, Nitesh. My name is Angana. I am an assistant professor in the Jindal School of Languages and Literature at OP Jindal Global University. I teach on the BA English Honors program. So professionally, I am always surrounded by and involved with books and the literary heritage of the human race. And reading is also naturally a hobby and a passion, to use Nitesh's words. So I am honored that I have been called here, put on the stand, hands up, to give my thoughts about a certain work of art that we will be discussing today.
Yeah, so the certain work of art was, it's the book The Sense of an Ending by Julian Barnes. Julian Barnes is not such a big name. Like when I was 20, 25, 26, like he was not one of the big names like, you know, uh, J.K. Rowling or, Arthur Conan Doyle, or he was not known like among, book reading communities, uh, especially in my school where we only had all these popular authors.
Mhm.
So I was part of this book club called Bring Your Own Book Club, and that's where everyone used to bring the book that they were reading, and we were also exchanging and we were talking about what books we are reading. And I was quite regular at that club, and one day some person read a quote from Julian Barnes' Sense of an Ending, and I was extremely impressed by it, and I just bought that book and read it. And that is how I discovered, and like it did leave a mark on me, but at that point, it was not such a big influence on me, but the book still stayed in my memory. That is something we'll obviously talk more about. But how did you discover this book, like the first time when you read it?
So I also like stumbled across this book in my masters, actually through friends who were reading it. When I was doing my masters in Jadavpur University in Calcutta, a lot of my friends whose reading habits I trusted were kind of citing this book. They were like, "Oh, you should read this book, Julian Barnes, Sense of an Ending," along with authors like Coetzee or Borges. These were names which would be frequently bandied about in my friend circles. And Sense of an Ending looked like readable enough just if you like pick up the book and see it by the spine. It does not look like a very lengthy work, and it isn't. It's a fairly breezy read. So in the midst of like all the reading that we had to do as part of the English syllabus, it felt like an innocuous enough book to kind of pick up and like leaf through in your leisure time. So that's how I came to Sense of an Ending, because my friends were reading it, and I read it. But again, I think this book is one which kind of requires you to be at a certain point in your life and for you to have a certain amount of lived experience. And of course, we can talk more about this, for you to really appreciate it. And I did not have either the lived experience or, I think, the necessary, I don't know, maturity. I don't know if that's the word I'm looking for, to appreciate it in the way in which I've been able to on like a subsequent reading. So it kind of over the years escaped my mind. Like it was one of a mass of books I read during my masters, but that's it. I really didn't remember the plot. I didn't remember much of the story, but I remembered liking it. So it definitely, um, I definitely enjoyed reading it, but it at that time, and I'm talking about around more than 10 years ago, it hadn't really left a lasting impression in terms of its content. So yeah, that's how I came to the story.
Yeah, I think I agree with what you said. Like, there wasn't much lived experience 10 years ago. I think approximately I discovered it 7 or 8 years back. But I was like really passionate about history. And if you look at Julian Barnes's work, like I think I read a couple of his novels, history is a common theme. He is obsessed with history, like not just at the macro level, but also at the micro level. And there are books, Elizabeth Finch, where he talks about history at the macro level. And but this one, the sense of an ending is about history at the micro level, at the individual's level.
Yeah.
And one of the things, I mean, like history was my favorite subject in school. People
One of
thought,
mine as well. Yeah.
yeah, people thought I would go into humanities, but I don't know, I didn't go into
Life
humanities.
had other plans.
Yeah. So, I mean, because of my affection for history, like Julian Barnes stayed in my memory. But as such, it didn't hit me. Like, as you said, it didn't cause a huge impact on me. But there were few things which I remember. I'm sure we're not talking about any, spoilers as such.
Yeah.
But I think we can make some references which don't reveal any plot of the story.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, like one of the things which stayed with me was the Adrian's letter. Like, obviously, we're not talking about what letter it is or whom it is addressed to,
Mm-hmm.
but Adrian's letter and his remarks about the gift of life.
Mm-hmm.
That is something which lodged in my memory, and it used to come up in like random conversations. I don't know if I'm having a good memory or it's just randomly accessed.
Mm-hmm.
But I think these characters and their traits and some of their remarks, they stayed with me, though I didn't really know how to make sense of it, or like it had not sunk in, as you said. So I think, I mean, that would be a right opportunity to, like I want to know which character you liked the most in the book, because there are definitely two, three characters.
Mm-hmm.
Um and I think it's also quite abstract if we try to talk about characters, because no one has a clue about the plot unless they've read the book, right?
Yeah, true.
So I think, I don't know, maybe we should talk about the plot in a broad sense without revealing anything. I mean, you would be able to do that, I guess.
Sure, I'll do that. I mean, the like sense of an ending, I think, is it's an easy read but deceptively so. Like you breeze through it, but then things stay with you for a while, at least if you read it with perceptiveness. Like again, the plot is fairly simple. The book is divided into two parts. It's entirely told from the perspective of the narrator, whose name is Tony Webster. And the first part of the book kind of recounts his childhood days, particularly his school days, talks a lot about his group of friends, of whom the character Adrian, whom Nitesh was mentioning, was a very crucial part. And there were two other friends, I think Alex and Colin. So these four boys were part of this like kind of group. They were all fairly precocious, and they prided themselves on being perhaps intellectually more superior than their peers. And a lot of the first part of the kind of story recounts their school days, their interactions with their teachers, how Adrian was particularly gifted and had a penchant for asking really kind of interesting and thought-provoking questions, even to his school teachers, who would often be kind of bamboozled by how bright this boy was. Tony talks about his dating life. He dates this woman named Veronica. It's a somewhat labored relationship. I know the laugh is important insofar as the story is concerned, but yeah, it's Tony's first real relationship, and spoiler alert, it like he breaks up with Veronica, but she continues to be a presence in his life in interesting ways. And later, it's kind of Tony discovers that
I think
Adrian is
we
dating
should
Veronica. No, I won't go beyond this. But anyway, the first part ends with that, and the second part kind of goes on a completely different trajectory. It's Tony no longer a school student, but Tony in the present. Um, I don't really think this is too much of a spoiler, but he's like divorced, and he's close to retirement, or he's retired,
he has
right?
already retired.
He has retired, and then something from his past kind of comes back in a very visceral way. And the rest of the novel tries to unpack what that kind of blast from the past is. And in doing so, it kind of really asks a lot of pressing questions about memory and memories of lived experiences and narration itself, and what it means to kind of re-examine your life, really. So if I call the first part of the story an examination, the second part, which is a longer part, is a re-examination of Tony Webster's life. So that is all I will say about the plot.
I mean,
And
that
yeah.
that was a really nice way to summarize this. I would not have you know felt I would not have articulated this way, like examination and re-examination. And I also felt that you stopped at the right point
Yeah.
where you said Veronica goes on to date Adrian.
Mm.
But I mean, like this is the perfect amount of information that anyone would want to make sense out of what we are speaking about. And also, I feel it that summary you gave would also motivate people to read the book.
I
And
hope they do, because I
yeah,
you really need to
uh,
read the book to find out what happens. What is it that kind of takes Tony on a journey of re-examination? I think that's very important. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And also, like, I think there are three major pillars in this story, right? It's Tony, Adrian, and Veronica.
Yeah.
And I think that is where my last question, where
Hmm.
we branched off into the summary thing itself.
All
Like,
right, you were asking me like which character I
like
like.
the most.
Um, I very different works, but one thing that, in my opinion, the sense of an ending shares with Wuthering Heights is that I don't like any of the characters.
Hmm.
I think they're all very compelling characters, but not necessarily likable. I
Hmm.
think all of them are very flawed and fallible in their own ways, which is exactly why it makes for such a compelling read. I think you don't always need to like a character. It's for me, it's the same with Wuthering Heights. I think all of the characters in Wuthering Heights are miserable. I hate Catherine, I hate Heathcliff, and I will fight anyone on this. But same thing, it's nonetheless such a compelling novel. And I feel the same way about Sense of an Ending. I'm very divided in my opinion of Veronica. Like, I can't quite make up my mind about her. Adrian, I think the glimpses that we are afforded into him are again very compelling and give much food for thought, but I don't think you are meant to truly decode who Adrian the person was. And I think Tony Webster is a particularly infuriating character. And the fact that he's the narrator makes it very interesting, right? Because I do think there is a kind of, like, he is educated about life and relationships and the kind of often fraught nature of interpersonal relationships by the end of the story, but nonetheless I don't entirely like him. So yeah, I think this is a question which I can only answer in this way, that this is a story where I don't necessarily like the characters, but the characters are very compelling. What about you?
I mean, if you remember, there's that one line that where Julian Barnes says something to the effect that we thought life would be like literature, but
Hmm.
it didn't turn out that
Yeah.
way. I mean, the exact quote we can pull out,
Mm-hmm.
but something to that effect. Like when I was a child, I mean, books were my most close friends
Mm-hmm.
because I didn't open up to a lot of classmates and even relatives and cousins and all of that. I felt
Mm.
so out of place, and I think a lot of my childhood was spent with either I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right. It's Enid Blyton, is it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, Enid
It's
Blyton. Yeah.
Enid Blyton. Then there was uh, J.K. Rowling, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Then Arthur Conan Doyle, and there was also some Merlin series, and then it was
Mm.
C.S. Lewis, that
Mm-hmm.
entire series of Narnia.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like of course, even Ramayana was
Mm-hmm.
influential. In that sense, like all of my heroes were drawn from literature. Like they were brave, they
Mm.
were smart, and they were fighting for something.
Mm-hmm.
So like those characters showed me like what I would want to be.
Mm-hmm.
But I think over the last 5, 6, or maybe even 7 years, I've been reading literature not to find my heroes, but to
Mm.
find out who I don't want to be as well.
Ah,
I mean,
very
it was
interesting.
not conscious. Like I'm not consciously trying to find, okay, this is the person I don't want
Mm.
to be, or I'm not choosing a book based on like I want to find someone who I don't want to be.
Yeah, yeah.
The thing is, you read these some of these books, and there are some characters, and then you start feeling, oh, this is who I should never become. Like how disgusting this is.
Mm-hmm.
In that sense, Tony Webster is the guy I don't want
Yeah,
to be.
I
Like,
agree with you.
I mean, like what kind of a mega loser this guy is. Like he's past retirement, past divorce, and he's still obsessed with some college girlfriend,
Yeah.
and he's unable to grow out of it, and like he's still trying to win her approval, even though
Hmm.
he knows that there's no way he can win her approval. And he tries to be good on the outside, but inside he is
Yeah.
also flawed. Like he's not having the gumption to say, okay, I hate you because you did that. I mean, he's not able to even stick to a negative
Yeah,
emotion.
I think he's a very infuriating combination of like petty, selfish, but like at the same time someone who cannot take a stand.
He can't take a stand, but also he wants to be perceived as somewhat of
Yeah,
a
likable. He
good
wants to
person.
be liked, right? He
Yeah.
has that, and that overrides like any sense of like honesty or even his ethical compass sometimes. I think he is too much, or at least tries to be too much of a people pleaser. But he is also someone, I think, who is very much in love with the idea of his own intelligence. Like, he thinks he's so intelligent and also perhaps in some ways above everyone else. The only person I think he gives credit as being more intelligent than him is Adrian.
Yeah.
But other than that, he has this whole like I'm better than you attitude, which he maintains till the very fag end until I think he's humbled by
Yeah.
life.
I mean, like, I don't know whether he realized that he has been humbled or not.
Hmm.
But like, coming to the other two characters, like Veronica always keeps saying, "Oh, you don't get it." I think that is
Hmm.
true. I think that he never gets
Hmm.
anything because, like, let's say I felt he should have not, extended this mental tussle with this
Yeah.
girl for an entire lifetime. And I couldn't really figure out what Veronica is like. But you said you can't make up your mind
I
about
think I think I find the mystery about Veronica intriguing. Again, I'm not exonerating her in the least. I think she's also infuriating sometimes in her decision not to be more forthcoming. Like she keeps saying that she never gives explanations and she makes these very cryptic pronouncements. Like, I mean, of course, understandably, um, like she's indignant to say the least at Tony, and she says, "You just don't get it, but you never did." But also, apart from the lecture, she's very cryptic and needlessly so sometimes. But I will say this also: my opinion of Veronica does change between the first and the second part. Like in the first part, I disliked her.
Hmm.
I just thought she was like needlessly petulant and also someone who was like very much in love with the idea of her own intellectual or whatever superiority, which perhaps made her a good match for Tony. Because remember when she would like, go through his music collection and his book, like collection of books, and she would always be making recommendations. And Tony says that one of the reasons why, like, she eventually starts dating Adrian is perhaps because she feels that he's a more worthy match for her intellect, which I think leads Tony to feel slighted. He was always insecure, clearly, about
Hmm.
Adrian. It's a combination of like awe and jealousy. Um, but in the first half, I disliked Veronica. Like, there's no two ways about it. But in the second part, with like the disclosure of a very crucial part of the story, I think my opinion of her changed quite a bit. Um, doesn't mean I ended up liking her, but I certainly didn't dislike her anymore. I understand to an extent where she's coming from, but I don't understand fully. And I think that that gulf is what makes this story very interesting. You don't always have to have a clear cut like decoding of characters. You can continue to draw observations and conclusions at multiple subsequent readings, right? So for me, Veronica is that if I had to choose one of the characters who is the most interesting to me of these three, I would choose Veronica.
Yeah, so about Veronica, like my reading was that, she didn't have a strong sense of herself. Like, there's
Hmm.
no anchor within herself, so that's why, like, she was looking for it externally. First through
Hmm.
Tony, and then she saw Adrian, and okay, Adrian is better than this guy in some way. I mean, like, I mean, does love even have any meaning? Like when you're just jumping from one place to
Yeah.
another? I mean, that's obviously like another question, but I don't want to put a moral kind of a question here. Like, it's not a moral question. I think it's like she didn't have a strong sense of self,
Hmm.
and
I agree, but
that's my guess.
yeah.
It's there's no conclusive evidence in the book to say that she didn't have a strong self.
I mean, but so if you think about it, the only character whose backstory or family history we are made privy to is actually Veronica. She's the only, we don't know too much about Tony's parents, we don't know about Adrian's. Like
That's
Tony's
true.
parents are just like pedestrian middle class English, but Veronica's family seems to be very dysfunctional.
They're
And
dysfunctional and also better off than Tony, that is mentioned.
yeah, there is certainly like a class difference
Yeah.
here. But I think it's a dysfunctional family because I also feel like perhaps she was pitted against her brother. Her brother is a character who appears and who goes to Cambridge or something, right? Like so,
The same school as Adrian.
yeah. Yes, so Adrian had also gone on to Cambridge, and it's interesting that Tony says that Adrian went to Cambridge and I went to Bristol because it's, there's
Hmm.
also the hierarchy is made very clear there.
Hmm.
Once again, that kind of like mixture of reverence and jealousy is very clear in kind of Tony's attitude towards Adrian. But insofar as like Veronica's family is concerned, again, like not to give spoilers, but like the dynamics of the relationship between her parents, and especially her mother, who clearly becomes an important character later, and her brother, who is also this kind of like really cocky guy who also perhaps thinks like way too much of himself. Um, an estimation that was perhaps worsened by him going to Cambridge. So I think her family is very peculiar in many ways, and counts like kind of seems to account for the way in which she holds herself. And I do think in her college days she did not have a very grounded sense of self. Whether she finds that or not later, we don't really know.
Yeah, that is
But
what I was about to
yeah.
say. Like, I feel she never finds it because initially
Hmm.
she's defined by her parents, then she's
Hmm.
defined by her partners, and
Hmm.
finally she's defined by her grief or the remains of
Yeah.
whatever is left from her, whatever big events happen in the first half of her
Hmm.
life defines her second half. In that sense, like she has never truly found something for herself from scratch without external factors.
That's true. That makes her a really tragic character,
So
like a
that is
proper tragic
tragic,
character.
and that also explains why she's always, speaking in tangents, never
Hmm.
speaking up clearly, or never communicating properly. Like maybe if she communicated properly with Tony in the first conversation, after in the second half, maybe he would never have pursued it, kept on
But
pursuing.
I think Tony would not have listened. Like she could have spoken, but Tony would not have listened because he also had, pardon my French, his head too far up his ass. So I think Veronica clearly comes from a place of like deep hurt and bitterness, which she is not perhaps ever able to let go fully.
Exactly. I mean, if you have to grow out of grief, you also have to grow into something, right? Like you have to grow
Hmm,
some
yeah,
identity for yourself in some sense.
yeah,
And in its absence, you will completely be defined by that event or set of
yeah.
events or some people who hurt you. Like, how long can you be affected by something of that sort, right?
Hmm.
So I feel Veronica's behavior is mostly driven by her lack of strong identity, which
Hmm.
an identity which she has built herself,
Right, right.
not based on her family or a boyfriend,
Yeah, on
or
markers which have been imposed upon her. Yeah.
not imposed, but she was also pursuing those herself actively, right?
Yeah,
It's
at
like you
some
can't
points, yeah.
impose a boyfriend on a girl. It's like
I guess. Yeah.
so family is imposed on you. It's like not your
Yeah, you
choice.
can't
But after
choose.
that, many choices were made by
True,
her
true.
on her own. So, I mean, like, I don't blame Veronica for what she is. But among these three characters, I would still say I like Adrian.
Adrian. Hmm.
Because, I mean, like, I like his intellect for one matter,
Hmm.
like his wit. And I know he's flawed, like, he makes one big mistake. But what I
Hmm.
like about this character is that he's taking accountability, like he's saying, I am responsible for all of these actions, and
Hmm.
um, I'm taking action which sort of it doesn't solve anything, but at least it gives closure. I mean, both Veronica and Tony are characters without closure, like they're just hanging somewhere in the middle.
But it's an interesting point again. Like we can't really like spoiler it for the listeners, but do you think I don't know. At some points I feel that I think Adrian ran away from
Like, yeah, you
things.
can say it's cowardice as well.
Yeah, it because but he was like smart enough to give it an intellectual spin when he says, right, like the what like the philosophical man has a duty to examine his life. I mean, that's all very well and that's all very like nice sounding, but aren't you also taking an easy way out? I mean, this does lead to a very big moral discussion on a topic which we can't
Yeah.
explicitly mention because it's very crucial to the plot of the story. But yeah, so like I think escapism versus accountability is, I think that's what the stand will depend upon the reader, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, like after taking accountability, like how many solutions were there? Like, I mean, that is debatable. Like anyone, even I have not thought like what could have been other solutions.
Yeah, I see him as a bit of a coward, honestly. Like, I
Yeah,
think he's very smart and he has that grasp on language to like give it a very heavy philosophical spin to make
yeah,
it sound like what he's doing is
is
like
courageous.
such a noble thing, like the
Yeah.
Roman way. And have I spoiled it now?
No,
But
no, I don't think many people have that kind of, subtle.
yeah, like yeah, so that like that whole thing, I think, but if you really think about it, I
Yeah,
think he
I'm
was
saying
a bit
I'm
of a
not
coward.
saying that this guy is like perfect or like he doesn't
No,
have
no, none of
any.
them are.
None of
Clearly,
them are
none of
clearly.
them.
So I would, among the three and among the characters in this novel, I think there is something in Adrian which is
Hmm.
worth admiring, and I didn't find anything which I would take away from any of the other
Right,
characters.
sure. I mean, that's the beauty of like subjective readings
Yeah.
of the text, right? Yeah.
So, I mean, like, okay, let's forget the solution part. At least he took accountability, which requires at least some amount of courage.
Yeah,
Uh,
I think at least that's more than what Tony ever could. As you called him, mega loser.
yeah, I mean, that is like a character no one should become.
Yeah, which is also, and I think Julian Barnes fully knew that, right?
Yeah.
Which is why it's all the more interesting that he is the narrator because he's the classic unreliable and untrustworthy narrator, who kind of has to.
No, yeah. Yes, so I was like, I think this is that point which, we should. I want to read that quote which actually got me to read this book. Um, yeah, this one. This is what describes Tony to the core,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
What did I know of life? I who had lived so carefully, who had neither won nor lost, but just let life happen to him, who had the usual ambitions and settled all too quickly for them not being realized, who avoided being hurt and called it a capacity for survival, who paid his bills, stayed on good terms with everyone as far as possible, for whom ecstasy and despair soon became just words once read in novels, one whose self rebukes never really inflicted pain. Well, there was all this to reflect upon, while I endured a special kind of remorse, a
Mm.
hurt inflicted at long last on one who always thought he knew how to avoid being hurt, and inflicted for precisely that reason.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is what describes this character, and like this shows like how much of like even his self rebukes are not hurting him. Like how bad can it be?
But I think at this point, like he does truly. truly feel remorse. And I think for me, as much as I don't like this character, this one line like is very chilling, which is that like he just let life happen to him.
Yeah.
And I wonder how many readers will think the same thing, because I mean, for various reasons we don't always like carpe diem, right? Go out and like seize
Mm.
life by whatever. Life just for so many people, life with all its like humdrum monotony just happens to you, and then when you take stock of your life, you're like, wow, I haven't done anything remarkable or anything of note, and what really is my legacy going to be? And I think this
Mm.
affects him a bit, because he mentions his daughter Susie incidentally, and who
Mm.
really doesn't like give too much of a hoot about him, right?
Yeah.
Like, she's like, yeah, okay, you're in my house, you're in the scene, you're my dad, I didn't choose you,
Mm.
but theek hai, fine. Like, I mean, that's the most I have to say about you. And that must be a very disheartening feeling when you're like, okay, the estimation of my own daughter is that, okay, he exists. So
Mm.
I think he does have a lot of retroactive remorse.
Mm.
And it's and I like that he chooses this word remorse. He doesn't necessarily say sorrow. It's just a more deep, visceral sense of regret that he feels,
Mm.
which is also encapsulated by the title of the story, the sense of an ending.
Yeah.
Like, I think in his like really in his twilight years, he's taking stock of his life. He's been forced to take stock of his life because of a chain of events, and he has just realized that, oh my god, what an entirely unremarkable life I've had. And I think that's a very scary realization for,
Mm.
like, I'm 33 years old and I read this line and I'm like, oh shit, my life, has it also been unremarkable? So I think
Mm.
it does trigger that question in you, that like, what is my legacy going to be? Am I
Mm.
just, did I live life, or did life just happen to me and I like let it happen and to me without really taking accountability, without really taking an active stand on anything, which is what
Mm.
Tony does. He's neutral to a fault. He's
Yeah.
neutral to the point where he can just be a hanging on the wall. Right. And yeah, I think, sorry, like I think that became too intense. But for me, that line is very, it hit me really hard, that had let life happen to him.
Yeah, I think that's the perfect segue to our second reading, which
Hmm.
was not even planned. Like
Yeah.
none of, I mean, I have barely reread a book. Like it's very
Hmm.
rare. Like the only other book I think I reread was Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse.
Herman Hesse, also
Uh,
great work.
yeah, I mean, we should talk about it sometime.
Someday,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, sense of an ending, like I happened, it was not even on my plan. It was not even there in my list of tasks to be done, in spite of hundreds of things on my plate.
Hmm.
So, I think when we went for this walk in Humayunpur, like our friends, our common friends, Chandan and Mahavir, they wanted me to do some literary walk because they had, I mean, we were having a lot of interesting conversations, and
Hmm.
I was also obsessed with Dostoevsky, and I
Mm-hmm.
was recommending a lot of books, and they thought I had some potential to be some literary walk leader.
Yeah.
And I myself never saw myself leading any walk of that sort, because we met in January 2023 for the first time,
Mm-hmm.
uh, during one of those walks,
Mm-hmm.
and I never saw any potential in myself to lead a walk, because I saw myself more as a nerd and like some introverted guy. But at that moment, like there was some code which was floating in my mind, and I felt, the year was also ending. We were in December or November or
Sense
something
of
like.
an ending, quite
So
literally.
it was quite literal, and I also had a very hard year from an emotional perspective.
Mm.
And it was also about me recollecting, like
Mm-hmm.
what events had preceded that, and like how that year had extremely, transformed me.
Mm.
And I think, like, I saw real emotional growth as a person during that year. And some of these quotes were floating in my head, and like, I said, okay, I have an idea, let us do this. And then I became almost annoying to a point where I wanted everyone to read that book and come prepared for this walk.
Mm-hmm.
And like, there was this concert by this Papon also on the same day, and I was like, I wanted to do both, but somehow, like, I was like committed to the first thought which I had agreed to.
Unlike Tony Webster, you took a
Yeah, I took a
stand.
stand. So I skipped the concert in spite of having bought those tickets.
Mm.
But I think the rereading, I didn't anticipate it would affect me so
Hmm.
intensely from an
Yeah.
emotional perspective. Like, you can't predict the impact of a work of art on you, because
Hmm.
like we were discussing in the beginning that you have to be emotionally at certain level to,
Hmm.
draw some conclusion from this book. I mean, like, I was not having any such thoughts. I just wanted to, reread the entire
Hmm.
plot because I'd forgotten most of the
Yeah.
things in 7 years. And I was seeing, like, as you said, sometimes even I'm 32, like, barely same age. So, like, when I read it for the first time, like, I was still having my first job, and like, I was fairly in a good place when I read it.
Mm-hmm.
And like, yeah, like, let's say I do ask myself, have I really lived my life? Like, so I think I took a lot of big risks in the gap
Hmm.
between my first reading and the
Mm-hmm.
second reading, from a career perspective, even from perspective of, interpersonal relationships.
Yeah.
So I felt like, I would never have regrets about anything which has transpired in these 7 years, because, like, he says at some point, okay, ecstasy and, grief or whatever were only
Hmm.
words heard in novels. Like, I think that would never happen to me, because I felt both of these things very, very intensely. I mean, to the point that either I felt like on top of the world, or I felt like I was the worst living
Mm-hmm.
being on earth. Um, I mean, in that sense, it was cathartic, and also it was sort of vindictive in a sense. I felt good that I'm not Tony Webster, and I
Yeah.
felt also good that at some point I was, willing to take accountability, irrespective of what consequences were going to happen after that. And also, I was really glad that three, four other people were also, forced to read this book, and they drew their own conclusions, and
Hmm.
all of them were like deeply emotionally affected by the book. Um, I think that is one of the good things which came out of this second reading. And then we also had a conversation about,
Yeah.
like, how all of this made sense. I mean, like, I would want to know, like, how you felt when you reread the book, almost 1.5 months ago, I guess.
Yeah. So, yeah, same actually. Like when I signed up for this walk, and kind of like the prompt for the walk encouraged the participants to read Julian Barnes' Sense of an Ending. And I was like, oh yeah, I remember reading this in my MA days. I don't remember the story at all. But okay, maybe it's a kind of good moment and a good time. And as you said, it's a walk we took in December, right? So year is ending, you have some time, like because I teach and quite literally the semester had ended and I had some free time. So I thought, okay, I'll reread it. And I reread the book in what, 1.5 days. Like I said, it's a breezy read. And this time, like, I think the book like really hit me with the force of a rampaging bull. Like it's just, I thought it was such, it packs such a punch in its brevity and also in its like simplicity. Like I said, it's an easy read but deceptively so. It the ideas, the feelings, the thoughts it leaves you with are not always easy to grapple with. And I was in a way like kind of really devastated by the end of the end of the story because I like Tony. I too I think it makes you, I think what this work does is it really makes you reflect upon life. And of course, the reason why this work is a rich literary piece is because everyone will take stock of their life differently.
I mean,
Um,
not in a self-help kind of a way,
no,
but
no, for sure. No, no, it's definitely very far away from like self-help. In fact, you should not take help from any of these characters. But no, the way in which it like it forces a meditation upon the past and upon remembrance, memory, legacy, um, relationships, the relationships which succeed, the ones which don't, and how far and what is the extent of like individual culpability in all of this. So a general meditation, and I think it really triggers this kind of reflective praxis in readers, which will obviously happen in different ways. And that is certainly how I felt. And like you said, a lot has changed between the time that I first read the book, which is when I could perhaps appreciate it externally as a good work of art. But I really felt that the second reading let me in to kind of the lives of the characters and like just the universe of emotions and ideas that the book provokes in you. And that I think it's a work which forces you to think, and I love works like that. And it's also a very open-ended work, and I'm like a sucker for open endings. So
yeah.
what you make of it is really like it will depend so much upon who you are as a person. But yeah, I think the second reading really moved me. I was very deeply viscerally moved by the reading of it, and it has left a fairly profound and like kind of lasting impression. I don't think I'm going to forget the story anytime soon anymore because now I have much more context and much more lived experience to unpack what I read about.
So, I mean, like you did speak about, taking stock and all of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I didn't think of any, further action because I almost felt vindicated that, I have. So the question which I generally ask is this the best I could have done? Or is this the best like
Mm,
some X person could
yeah.
have done? And if the answer is yes, then obviously like there's no point pondering about it
Mm-hmm.
or feeling regret or anything of that sort, right? So in that sense, like I didn't have any further action. If I didn't want to take any further action after reading this. It was only sort of a vindication or catharsis.
Mm.
But is there something which you felt that you should, do or like? I mean, what? So you're left with this feeling. Like, what are you going to do with this feeling?
Yeah, for me, I think it was like a few things. A, the importance or the necessity of re-examining things. I think
Hmm.
that's, for me, that was a very crucial part
Hmm.
of this story. And again, like I think it just forced, okay, force is not the right word. It just like prompted in me a general reflection upon should we be more proactive in ensuring how life happens to us instead
Hmm.
of like just
Yeah.
being a passive recipient, right?
Exactly.
And for me, one thing I think which Tony's story really like drilled into me is that if I can be anything in life, insofar as other people are concerned, I want to be kind. I think
Mm.
kindness is underrated. Because the ways in which you can hurt people often leaves, often kind of recalibrates their lives in
Mm.
irreparable ways. So I think this work actually, I don't know if it sounds far-fetched, but it has kind of made me realize that I need to be more mindful of how my actions and words can affect others.
Mm.
And that if you can be anything in the world, be kind. Like empathy and kindness and compassion are really admirable traits to cultivate. And perhaps if you don't, years later, when you're in your 60s
Mm.
and the past comes back to you, perhaps upon that re-examination, at least if you've been a kind person, if you've been a nice person, at least you will not feel really shitty. At least you don't have to be a Tony Webster.
I mean,
So,
that's something which made me think a lot. I do agree, like, kindness is one of the best traits to have.
hmm.
Just one addendum to that is like you also need to have your own boundaries, right? Like there is
Huh, for sure.
kindness is not like a huge ocean, like you can keep on being kind
No,
to
of course,
everyone.
of course. Like,
I mean that meanness is also brought out. The meanness which we sort of encounter in these characters, I think it also has its origin in the lack of boundaries. Like some person
hmm,
didn't have boundaries, they didn't, advocate for what they needed,
hmm,
and they felt wronged, and in response to that, they were mean.
hmm,
So I think the root cause there was like this person didn't know how to, advocate for himself.
hmm,
And when he was disrespected, like he felt that he had to, give it back to this person. And that became like a endless back
back
and
and forth,
forth, right?
yeah.
So I think kindness is good. Like you can have kindness, and it's like you also need some judgment. Like where is the boundary
Hmm.
here?
I think related to
Yeah,
this is also the necessity of taking a stand. I think just
exactly. Yeah,
don't be a fence sitter,
yeah.
like which is what I think Tony did all his life. Like he just existed. He didn't make a mark because he
Yeah.
was just always so hesitant. I don't know if scared is the right word, but he was always so hesitant to like just take a stand.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of moral, ethical, emotional, whatever compass that exists in each individual, perhaps there's also like a duty that human beings have to take a stand. And I think that's
Yeah.
also important in like decoding what this work is trying to say and where perhaps Tony falls short.
Yeah, we're not even feeling how fast time is passing, right? Like,
Honestly,
it's
we've been
because
like,
of the nature of the
yeah.
conversation and the subject itself. I think there are so many quotable quotes from this book, right? Like, you end up underlining almost every line.
Yeah.
But I think this is one of the ways we thought how we could end this. Like, you read your favorite quote or the quote which left a mark on you,
Um,
and
to do it justice, I'm going to try and find the exact quote.
yeah, you should. I mean, we have no such hurry.
Um, once. Yeah, so I think for me personally, this quote really, really stayed with me.
Mm.
Um, when we are young, we invent different futures for ourselves. When we are old, we invent different pasts for others. And I think this is such a beautiful encapsulation of kind of just how this work unfolds. So yeah, what about?
Yeah, I mean, like every day I feel my favorite quote from this book is changing, so I'll just go with what is happening today. Um, where is it? I think this one is the one which makes a lot of sense, at least right at this moment. How often do we tell our own life story? How often do we adjust, embellish, make sly cuts? And the longer life goes on, the fewer are those around to challenge our account,
Mm.
to remind us that our life is not our life, merely the story we have told about our life,
Yeah.
told to others, but mainly to ourselves.
Yeah. That's also beautiful. So
Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
there's no dearth of beautiful quotes in this
Yeah,
book.
really, it really is a an eminently quotable work. Yeah.
I think that is the first, I mean, that is the right spot to, end the first
Yeah.
episode of Hands Up. Like, this book will definitely make you, stand and, be vulnerable
For sure.
and, think of what you've been doing all your life.
So no pressure, guys.
Cool. Enjoy the existential crisis. Goodbye.
Bye.